Susan asking, how is Good Friday observed in Korea and Okinawa? Rachel and Philip.
Oh,
Well,
well, I mean, it depends on whether you're Catholic
yeah,
or you're Presbyterian or you're Methodist or Baptist, right? Those are kind of the
mm,
biggies here in Korea.
yeah,
But, Catholics kind of observe Good Friday the same way everywhere.
yeah.
I have friends who've been going to mass every morning at 5:30 this week.
That's
5:30
nice.
every morning,
Yeah,
every morning.
I couldn't do
Yeah.
that though,
It,
but
but
that's
but
very
yeah,
nice to
it's
know.
not. Easter is not a Korean holiday. It's a Western
Mm,
holiday. So the Christians celebrate it in their churches and in in their homes and in their communities. But Easter is not a holiday that's reflected in the national consciousness here. So it's not like in Europe, various countries in Europe where there are all kinds of Easter festivities and Easter processions and Easter, Easter mass and Easter fairs. It's not here. Here it's a Christian thing that's celebrated individually in various churches, but it's not a national thing. So
mm, mm,
same
mm.
thing. I assume it's the same thing in Japan, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Like myself and Yuki are celebrating Good Friday today. Like we're not eating any meat whatsoever today. We're going for fish instead. But that's so easy to do in Japan because of the amount of sushi.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
I'm not certain that beautiful, yummy sushi counts in the spirit of
yeah,
the
yeah.
Lenten fast.
Like in Ireland, it was serious. Like no pork, no beef. You were like, "What the hell can I eat?" But in Japan, it's kind of like, "Oh, sushi night, great."
Yeah,
You
right.
know.
I just,
Yeah,
I, I think there's a lot of rules lawyers in various religious communities and in the Middle Ages too, right? They came up with all kinds of workarounds for the no meat thing. So if they moved the goalpost on what counted as meat. Does it live in the water? It's a fish.
yeah,
So
yeah.
beavers are fish, geese are fish, duck are fish, fen
Oh,
hens are fish.
Jesus, imagine saying that to my dad. My dad would have a fit because we said that one year about duck, and no, duck is meat. No, you can't be eating that. No, fish was a fish. Fish was anything my dad couldn't eat properly, and we had to suffer with my dad because my dad hated fish in every single way. He hated the texture of fish. He'd eat fish, by the way. He's one of those fellas. You put something in front of him, he'll eat it, but he'll complain while doing so. And I remember being like 4 years of age, and it was Good Friday, and we were having fish and chips. And this was back in the day when they had all the tiny bones in the fish,
Oh
and my
gosh,
dad spending
gosh.
hours taking the bones out of his mouth, bitching the
Oh
whole time. Like,
no, I don't. I mean, it feels and with fish like that, it feels like you're doing as much work, physical
yeah,
work, to eat it as the caloric value that you are getting by eating it. So it
mm,
feels like you end up having to eat more afterwards
yeah.
because you've
Oh,
done so much work picking all those bones out.
but it's so weird. I watch my wife, Yuki, take apart a fish. She can literally just get the spine and go whap, and then pull out
Oh
the
yeah.
entire spine with everything in it. And I'm like, you're so good at that. Like, I watched her do it a few times. I've managed to pull it off, but Yuki's just so gifted at taking all the bones out all at once.
Yeah,
But
my Korean friends are masters at that. If we go
yeah.
out to a restaurant together and fish is served, I let them handle the slaughtering of the fish.
Oh, yes, please. Hey, Kevin, how are you keeping? Good morning or good evening, Kevin. How's your day been going? And Jim, how are you keeping as well? I'm doing well in shape. I'm doing
Yeah,
well. Aye.
it's
Any
beautiful.
news on your side, Jim?
Philip, are the cherries blossoming? Cherry trees? Are there cherry trees in Okinawa? And are they blossoming or have they already blossomed?
They're blossoming in mainland Japan, right? But get this, they started blossoming in Okinawa straight after, what was it called? Christmas. So at Christmas,
Oh,
after
right.
Christmas, sorry, around New Year, they started blooming everywhere. Everything was pink. And I was like, oh my God, this is so magical. And I kept telling myself, go take a picture. And I was like, I'll take a picture, what was it, tomorrow or whatnot. Before you know it, they're all dead. What was it? They had all changed again. What was it? Because we just gone into raining season in Okinawa. So now it's all raining season. So they're all gone again. So,
Right.
oh,
Oh
stop.
my goodness. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So it's Easter, right, everyone? We're in the Easter season. We're in the Holy Week. Today is Good Friday here in Asia.
Mm,
And I was reading some very interesting things, some problems that medieval people experienced with the two kinds of calendars that there were for holy days.
mm,
And that persists to this day. There's some of the holy days are on fixed dates.
yeah.
St. Patrick's Day is March 17th. But
Mm-hmm.
then there are other holy days that move on the calendar based on, I think probably originally the lunar calendar, but then ultimately, based on where other holy days fall. So Easter is a movable feast,
Mm,
literally. It migrates forwards and backwards in spring depending on other days. And so sometimes it would happen that two holy days, like very holy days, feast days, would fall on the same day with two very different sentiments and practices. So in 1502 in Florence, the Feast of the Annunciation, which is the day on which the Archangel Gabriel comes to Mary and says, Ave Maria, gracia plena, right?
mm,
Hail Mary, full of grace, right? You are going to give birth to the Son of God. And
mm,
so that's a day of celebration on the Christian calendar, right? It's the dawn of hope, the beginning of salvation, the birth of the Savior is upon you, rejoice. And it fell on the same day as Good Friday, which
mm.
is the day on which Christ is crucified. And so you have this day of extreme joy combined with this day of mourning and solemn sorrow. And the chronicler who noted this in 1502 said that it was very strange because people were going about being both joyful and sorrowful all in the same breath in some cases. So it's this it's almost like the closest modern equivalent for secular people would be like when the bank holiday falls on a Saturday
Mm.
and you don't actually really get to celebrate, get a day off of work. It's like, well, we have the Feast of the Annunciation and we have Good Friday. So on the Feast of the Annunciation, we usually have feasting and there's dancing and there's celebration, but it's also Good Friday, so it's supposed to be a day of solemnity. So what are we supposed to do here?
Yeah, yeah. So what was the solution? They just
He didn't say.
oh,
All the chronicler says is all he says is that people were being both joyful and sorrowful, which I think might mean that some people were probably singing, songs of joy, both secular songs and church songs, and were actually having their feasts and the usual celebratory things. And other people were, going to mass and being very solemn and participating in the vigil and all of that. So
mm,
yeah, he doesn't. I wish he'd gone into more details
yeah, I
about
know, right?
what that actually meant,
That what a mess. It sounds like a complete mess of a day, to be honest
right?
with
And
you.
that was, I mean, that's just one example. Like that
Mm,
happened, every couple of years. If you look at the medieval Christian calendar and
mm,
all the holy days, it's full. It's chock-a-block with holy days, and so it's going to happen eventually that
mm.
something solemn is going to fall on Christmas, or which is also supposed to be not only a day of joy. Christmas is like the raucous party season of the medieval calendar.
Mm.
So it's going to happen. You just have to deal with the dichotomy, I guess.
Yeah, sounds absolutely my world. What's everybody doing for Good Friday? Are you guys staying away from meat, or are you guys eating fish, or what are you doing for Good Friday? And any plans for the weekend? Rachel, any plans for the weekend?
Oh yeah, well, it's I'm going to be live streaming a lot this weekend.
Mm,
In Korea, we try not to do anything on the weekend if we can avoid it because Korea is a country with extreme domestic tourism,
yeah.
courtesy of the fact that it's basically an island.
Yeah.
And, yes, it's connected to Asia via North Korea, but for all practical purposes, it's an island.
Yeah.
So that means that there's no easy way to just take a road trip very
Mm,
far. So
yeah.
everyone's weekend road trips are in Korea, which means when the weather gets nice like this and it's cherry blossoms, oh buddy, the whole country is going to be like Disney World this weekend.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Imagine.
terrible. So we're going to not go anywhere. We're going to we're going to stay very local. We're going to try to hit spots that the our fellow, if we want to go out for a walk, we're going to probably avoid cherry blossom area.
Oh God, isn't that bad? Is it?
Oh, it's that bad.
Uh,
I mean, when everyone lives in a, no, I don't know. I would say probably, this is just an estimate, at least 70% of the country live in apartment high rises.
uh,
So they want, when the weather's beautiful like this, they want to get out of their apartments.
mm,
Fair. They want to get out into the beautiful parks. They want to go out hiking in the mountains. So everyone, 56 million people, kind of leave their homes on the weekend and go nice places. So there's only so much room. There's only so many places. So it gets real crowded. Hiking in Korea is not a solemn, Walden esque transcendentalist experience in Korea. Hiking in Korea means you're going hiking with 1,000 of your favorite, your closest friends you've never met before.
oh,
So all the very well cared for, well manicured hiking trails, thousands of people on them on any given weekend. So
uh,
we're not, yeah, we're staying home. That's what we're doing. I'll do some live streaming. If we can find a spot that's not chock-a-block humanity, we'll go there and maybe we'll do a live stream dance practice or medieval sewing party or something like that. Or your suggestion, the way there are some people now doing their research live
mm,
with their community. I really love that idea.
yeah.
Could you tell us more about what you've been seeing some of our fellow history tubers doing?
The YouTuber on the history side, you do have Metatron. I've bitched about Metatron a few times, all right. But when it comes down to live streams and stuff, his live streams are quite good. And he does that, especially with people online. You see a lot of people turn around and say, "Oh, did you see A, B, and C happening within so and so's channel?" And he will literally there and then jump over to that channel and start watching it. The only problem I'm having is that we were doing that before on my live stream once, and then YouTube just completely gave me a warning. Like the warning I have right now on my YouTube is from live streaming, where somebody sent me a video to review, and who's somebody? Thanks very much for that.
Yeah,
I
awesome.
think
Thank
that's a
you.
question for you, Rachel.
Herb
There.
Queen. Oh yeah, Herb Queen. Well, Herb Queen, we'll get to your question in a moment. I promise.
Oh, sorry,
Philip,
that's for
finish your
me.
thought. Or
um,
finish your thought.
No, it was just Metatron had. What was it? No, I was talking about YouTube and myself. No, no,
Yeah.
I got into trouble because we were chatting away, and somebody wanted me to review a video from the 16th century, and so I jumped on, had a look at the video from the 16th century. They were covering Polish and Russian armor. Don't
Mm.
specialize in Polish and Russian armor, well, armor from Moscow. But the armor looked absolutely amazing from my perspective. 1612, was it 1612? But we looked at it anyway. And yeah, YouTube came in and just cut me off straight away and gave me a warning. Which I find quite strange, to be honest with you, because the likes of Asmongold, Metatron, all those YouTubers do that all the time. So I'm not even sure what my punishment was. And the
Right.
thing is with YouTube, you can't ask. There's no
No.
way of asking, okay, so why was I punished? They give you like
Yeah.
a vague idea of what you were punished for, but they don't go into detail.
Community standards. It violates community
Then
standards,
why
whatever that
why
means.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Why am I breaking community standards? And yet
Right.
Metatron and Asmongold film way more and show off way more stuff than I did there. And that was that warning is still there as well. YouTube took it very seriously against me. And yet, there's other people doing far worse than I am, I
Right.
I don't know what the story is.
Yeah, it is frustrating because good luck getting a real human on the horn from
Oh,
YouTube, like an actual human to talk to or review your case or explain. It's not going to happen.
oh, especially
Okay,
now, it's all AI.
no, no,
I'll
it's
just
all AI.
answer this
Yeah,
question actually because I
yeah.
thought it was for you. It was actually for me. What about all the fertility symbols around Easter? I am getting out of mass today by babysitting. When it comes down to fertility symbols from an Irish perspective, I do know of the 12th century. Rachel could definitely go into further detail about fertility and Easter. But when it comes down to Ireland, there definitely must have been something there because of the amount of, they're called Sheila Gig effigies around Ireland. Rachel's probably seen a good few of them.
Mm.
Have you seen the Sheila Gig? Well,
I,
noticed it, like.
yeah, I have. Yeah,
Mm.
in research.
So there is a good few of them that pops up around the 13th century, and also on top of that as well, we do know there's a lot of, wink wink, going for purgatory. What was it? No, pilgrim walks are called, but there
Yeah,
seems to be
pilgrimages. Yeah.
pilgrim walks. There seems to be a lot of hints. I remember I was in university, and one of the professors of folklore was looking at people that went on pilgrim walks up to mountains. And there seems to be a lot of wink, wink, for young people to go by themselves in couples up to the mountain, all the way from way early on in history up to around the 19th century, until the Catholic Church cops on to what's going on. And then when the Catholic Church cops on to what's going on, they force the entire villages to go on these pilgrim walks. This happened on, I think it's St. Patrick's Pilgrim. He's got one of the St. Patrick Hills. And people used to go up there pilgrim walking, but they used to do it as couples. And
Right.
there used to be a lot of wink, wink going on. And so the church found out that people were going up to the mountain to get up to no good. And so the church forced the entire village to go up together as a group to go up. And this happened in the 19th century, believe it or not. And what?
Chaperoned. They sent them up
Yes,
with
the
chaperones.
priest went up as well with them. And this happened in St. Patrick's, I think it's St. Patrick's Hill, or Kevin will correct me on one of those hills anyway. If it's, what was it called? It happened on that one, and then it just kind of spread all over Ireland, which kind of indicated that all the pilgrim walks, at certain times of the year around this year, from St. Valentine's Day, Easter, were used to kind of set couples together before they got married. So they would be like, you and so should go up to the hill together. And then come back down again, and we'll see what happens from there.
We'll
Okay.
see what happens. We'll see what happens in 9 months, eh?
Yeah, exactly. Which makes sense for people to be kind of paired together around this time of the year before going into the summer. And I find it funny as well because you've highlighted this like 1,000 times that during this time of the year, people are meant to be obsessed from jumping into bed together, which
Yeah.
I find kind of strange around St. Patrick, what was it, St. Bridget's Day, Valentine's Day, and all those little days, especially when there seems to be, what was it called, kind of quote unquote clan assemblies where people are being kind of, coupled together, they're kind of being put together. So I do find it strange that we have these kind of engagements happening between families and clans, while at the same time nobody's supposed to be rolling in bed together, like.
Yeah, it's so one of the, very rarely can we say, well, this is what people did all across Europe. But
Mm,
the reality is that the church, the church in Rome,
yeah.
is sort of one of these universal presences across, especially by the time you're getting into the later Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, and the Late Middle Ages. It's a pretty dominating presence, and it does create a lot of similarities in approaches to certain aspects of life,
Mm,
and amongst them are sex, right, and
yeah.
and procreation. And as you were referring to the fact that during these Lenten periods and on Ember days, you are not supposed to engage in reproductive activities. You're
Mm,
not. So for Lent, for the entirety of Lent, people are supposed to abstain
mm,
from any joys of the flesh, which
mm,
includes, rich foods. It's supposed to include meat. It's supposed to include butter. It's supposed to include sexual activity. And so hypothetically, by the time Easter actually arrives, people should be in a bit of a state,
yeah.
as it as it were. Now, whether the degree to which that stricture to abstain is observed, it varies highly, and obviously there are plenty of people who did not abide by that.
Mm,
But there were some people who definitely did. For instance, Eleanor of Aquitaine, fantastic lady, was married to a French king, Louis the Pious, as he was
Mm,
called. And the second you have a king named the Pious, you
yeah.
know he's probably going to be not very fun.
Mm,
And he was not very fun. He was a real stick in the mud. And it seems that he actually adhered to those strictures of you are not supposed to procreate on these days, which means if you calculate it all together, it's 100 plus, more than over 120 days of the year
mm,
when you are not supposed to be procreating. And if you combine that with the complexity of a woman's fertility cycle,
mm,
your chances of actually getting pregnant as a couple plummet
mm,
precipitously. And so historians theorize that's probably why Eleanor only had two daughters with him,
mm.
two children with him, despite them being married for more than 2 years, because he was such a pious abstainer that they didn't have as many opportunities as they could have to actually conceive.
Mm.
But I'm pretty certain, especially based on the times that I've read about penances being given for infractions during Lent, I'm confident that not everyone was adhering quite so perfectly to that stricture of abstinence,
Mm.
which doesn't necessarily play in so much. That doesn't really answer the question about the symbolism. So I think Herb Queen, if I understand correctly, I think she's referring to bunnies and eggs, maybe,
Yeah.
and any other actual fertility symbols that
Mm.
may be baked into the Easter tradition. I'm not certain about Ireland, medieval Ireland, or even modern Ireland. There's a lot of debate about whether the eggs are in fact a fertility symbol,
Mm.
or if it's a question of, well, during Lent, you're not in certain Lenten fasting traditions and strictures, depending on the era in question, you're not supposed to be eating eggs.
Mm.
Eggs are one of the things you're not supposed to eat, in fact, and you're not supposed to eat cheese. So, meanwhile, the hens have maybe been laying, depending on when they start laying again after the winter. And so, hypothetically, by the time you get to Easter, there is possibly a buildup of eggs because you
Uh,
haven't been eating them. That's one
mm.
theory I read. And that's so it doesn't really, it's more of a pragmatic aspect of we've got eggs because we weren't allowed to eat them for 6 weeks, basically, for
Mm.
40 days. Right. So, and then the bunnies, some people say that is a holdover from Saxon beliefs about fertility. I haven't really seen the evidence for that, but I haven't delved deeply into this because in the medieval sources, they don't really talk about bunnies and eggs that much as it ties to the Easter, the celebration of Easter. So it hasn't really cropped up in my research. Yeah. What about you? What about bunnies and eggs or other symbols of fertility tied with medieval Easter in Ireland? Have you found anything there?
When it comes down to that stuff, no. I do know that there is a lot of fertility going on with the symbolism around Saint Bridget and that kind of, as I was saying there, the whole pairing of couples and the whole symbolism around fire and all that kind of stuff. Um, when it comes down
When
to
is
the
when is
Easter
when is
symbol,
St. Bridget's Day? When is St. Bridget's Day?
that's around February. So that
Ah,
was
okay.
just before
Right, that
Easter
makes
and stuff.
sense.
Yeah.
Wow, what a coincidence. Right before we go into 40 days of fasting and abstinence, there's
But
a
that's what I mean.
holiday. It's a
Yeah.
coincidence. What a coincidence.
But that's what I mean. Like you have a
Yeah.
load of like wink wink and symbolism. And even this whole thing of, oh well, this is all going on. You go for a nice pilgrim walk up to the mountain and bring so and so with you. And they probably won't even be married. When I can't remember I apologize for this, but I can't remember who was the professor who said this, but she specializes in folklore in University College of Cork, and I was going to a few of her classes. When you guys in the comment section will probably remember her name. But I remember being in her class and she was highlighting the fact that, it was very much hint, hint that some of these people were not married and yet they were kind of given a hint, hint to go up to the mountains, have a bit of fun, and we can, couple, marry you guys off when you come back down, if
Right.
everything goes well. It's interesting as well that there's other spots as well, as Kevin has pointed out about Diarmid and Grania's cave, is another place of romantic wink winks going on. And there's also a spot in Mallow where I'm from as well called Lover's Walk. It's just before So you have Mallow Castle and Mallow Town on one side of the bridge. Just before you go over the bridge, there's a walk to the right side of it, and that walk there is called Lovers Walk, and it's where all the teenagers have always hung around since life begun. And then when you get to the very end of Lovers Walk, there's a beautiful waterfall, and it's called Lover's Leap. And the teenagers
uh,
have always gone up there to jump off of it.
of course.
It's pretty classic. I did it as a child. I did it as a child,
Of
So
course.
all the teenagers go down there with their cans and everything, and we go drinking. It's great. And the police never come down. The police know fully well we're down there. And we used to go down with bottles of vodka and stuff. It used to be brilliant. And you just pass the vodka around. You used to call it bushing. It's brilliant.
Bushing? Great.
Bushing. Yeah, we used to call it bushing.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
The days.
Oh yeah. So Tom and Cora made the comment he didn't know about the eggs. So eggs, I don't think eggs fall under the modern. I don't know if eggs fall under the current church's strictures on Lenten days, like now Good Friday. I don't know if they fall under the no meat thing, but in the Middle Ages, depending, this again, Middle Ages is not a monolith across the 1,000 years, and so the strictures on what counted as Lenten food or not, what was acceptable to eat during the Lenten fast, those sometimes changed or were altered. So it seems there were times when eggs were an acceptable thing to eat on an Ember Day, for instance, but weren't necessarily an acceptable thing to eat during a Lenten fast like Advent or Lent, as we call it. So you have to really, if you want to know for a very specific time and place, you really have to look into what strictures were in effect then, because there isn't a blanket statement for all of the Middle Ages. Just like there isn't a blanket statement for all of the modern era. The Catholic Church evolved there as well, and its policies and what days were observed as Lenten, actually actively observed as Lenten or Ember days, and which days were not. Right.
I love how it's called Devil's Glen. Devil's Glen is supposed to be a lover spot near Dublin from the old song Molly Brigham.
Right.
Grew up eating eggs and cheese during Lent.
Yeah, it's not a modern thing. I'm pretty certain it's not a modern stricture, but the medieval Lenten fast was generally much stricter than the modern one. And in fact, I actually have recipes. I have found recipes. It's kind of gross, actually, to me, because I don't really care for fish broth at all. Unfortunate, because in Korea, fish broth is one of the main broths that they use in a lot of soups here. But one of the replacements for dairy was fish broth as a thickener. And they would actually, the recipe for, a stew or a pottage or some kind of mashed vegetable, or even in some cases pies like tarts, we'll say, if instead of using this thickener, this thick creamy dairy product, like cream or milk, you can use fish broth. And apparently the fish broth, it seems that the fish broth was so rich in collagen that it actually gelled, that it would actually lead to a gelling effect. And so there's Lenten cheese recipes I found that are made using fish broth. Doesn't that sound yummy?
Oh, it does. All right. I actually quickly looked that up about what you were just saying there about the collection of eggs. Yeah, it seems to be the same thing in Ireland as well. If you're looking at the annals, there is people are collecting eggs, but they're not eating them. It was actually children. The job of children was to collect the eggs. So we know from references of children that they were collecting eggs as well. But what's also funny as well, do you know about the Easter controversy between Ireland and Rome during the 7th and 6th, what was it, the 6th and 7th century?
Oh, were they arguing about when it was, right?
Yeah, the date of
that
Easter.
Controversy. The dating of these holidays is always such a fascinating philosophical debate, right? Go on, explain what was going on there.
Well, originally, so as I was saying, and this is what, God damn it, like I keep getting into arguments with people because people don't understand insular Christianity. But basically, Ireland after the fall of Rome, quote unquote, the fall of Rome and the Dark Age, quote unquote, right? So don't bite my head about that. But regardless,
Right.
Ireland was kind of left to its own device with
Right.
the Bible, right, and other Roman literature. So they ended up having their own interpretation of Christianity. By the way, they still seen themselves as part of the wider Christian world. You can see that in St. Columbanus's letter to the Pope, where he says, we have a different interpretation, but we still see ourselves drinking from the source of the water, right? So in that letter,
Right.
he's basically
We're
saying, hey, look, we're doing our own thing here, but we still see ourselves as Roman Christian, right? But to
right.
simplify the
Part
conversation,
part of the community, even
yeah,
though we have different approaches.
yes.
Yeah.
But to make things simple, we always refer to them as either insular Christianity or Celtic Christianity, okay? But regardless, Ireland ends up having its own interpretation of Easter, right? And this is where it gets a bit wild because they can't, was Ireland's calculated one interpretation of what the date of Easter should be. And
Right.
Alexander in Egypt calculated a different date. And because the Pope had seen the Irish as, taking stupid Irish people off to the side, sure, what would they know? He picked the Alexander date. But this is where it gets really funny because recently, in the last 5 years, academics did actually do the calculation for Easter. And they actually found out the Irish were right. The Irish actually got the date right. And it was
Oh.
Egypt that got it wrong. Yeah.
It is, it reminds me of so many of the debates in the early church about, the nature of Christ,
Mm.
duophytism, monophytism. It's just, at the end of the day, does any of this really matter to the message that Christ was spreading? Right? Like,
Yeah.
does any of that really matter? But they get so bogged down in the
Yes.
details that they forget the overarching importance of what Christ was actually saying.
But my problem is recently where you have all these YouTubers online quoting from the Old Testament and
Oh
then
God,
literally grinding their teeth and getting so passionate about it. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, that does not matter, does it?
no.
Especially compared to the message of Jesus. I'm just like, fuck, you
Well,
know?
these Christians, and God forbid, we're about to wander down a lane that's going to attract trolls. But,
Oh, that's
um,
true.
but I'll say it anyway. I'll say it anyway, Philip. Christ says, He says, I bring the new covenant.
Mm,
Right? I'm bringing the new way. This is the new way. You should follow this way.
mm.
And yet, a lot of God, especially Protestants in the U.S., get so bound up in the Old Testament,
Oh, shut
and
up.
and it's like did you not read the New Testament? Did you
Mm.
are you just forgetting everything that Christ said? Oh yes, you are, because you don't want to follow the words of a brown-skinned socialist. Right?
Be bold, Rachel. You're going to start World War III in the comment section.
I know, I am. I know. Let's get back to the topic of Easter in the Middle Ages.
We could also bitch about bloody the Irish famine as well. What was it
Oh
called?
God, yes.
That sure exploded.
Oh my
Just
God.
caused more problems in the chat. Because it's World War Three. Have you gone into? Was it into, especially the Instagram one? I haven't looked too much on the TikTok and YouTube. Doesn't seem to be too bad, but the Instagram one, gee, it's like World War Three in that comment section. It's
Yeah.
wild.
It is amazing, the trolls that have just come out of the woodwork. And I mean, some really gruesome things people are saying, like, I mean, like, basically supporting genocide. You know, if they were too weak to figure it out themselves, then they clearly deserved what they got, they being the Irish, obviously, in this
Work
conversation.
out what that we had been crushed and our food taken from us.
Right,
Like,
right, exactly. I'm like, okay, buddy, I hope you get transported back to 1848 Ireland, and let's see how you do.
yeah,
Um,
like the system, the British system, British Empire did not function the way it should have functioned. Plus, the problem is as well is that there were members of Parliament who, just like today within the British Parliament, which English people will agree with, is that they were ran by a bunch of sadists, people who literally just only cared about themselves. And I swear they must have got pleasure out of hurting others, because even the statement that the Prime Minister of Britain had made in, what was it, 1846, what was it called? That this is God's judgment
Oh,
onto
you're
the
talking about
Irish.
Trevelyan, right? That piece of
Yeah,
garbage, that piece of shit who I hope is
yeah.
burning in hell. Yeah, Trevelyan
Well,
can
he
fuck
is
right
like,
off, excuse my language.
mm.
He can he was an example of the worst kind of Christian,
Oh,
right? The worst
oh,
kind.
was he even a Christian at that
I
point?
mean,
Like,
he
what's going
identified
on
as
here?
such. He yeah, I mean, was yeah, exactly. He identified as that, but that doesn't mean it was so. I
Yeah,
can think I'm a rock, but that doesn't make me a rock.
yeah, exactly.
So
Oh
yeah,
God.
was a piece of garbage, a punishment
Mm.
upon the Irish for their laziness, as he put it. I'm like, that
Oh
man.
yeah, and yeah, we're winning all his wars for him. So it's like, oh, they're lazy there, but we're gonna get you to win all our wars for us in India. Or yeah, thanks very
Right,
much. Oh, we've been
right.
winning all of his wars since 1803. So straight away, when the British, what was it, subjugated Ireland, they literally straight from the get-go got us to win all their bloody Napoleonic wars for us. If you look up every single Napoleonic war, there was an Irish regiment there completely smashing them, especially the Connacht Rangers. And that's the thanks he gives to us. Oh, thumbs up there now for winning all your wars. And it gets worse because then we go off and we pretty much win World War One. Hey, Rachel, guess what
Yeah.
surviving regiment survived the Battle of the Somme?
Oh, I'm sorry. Which regiment survived the
Which
Battle of the
regiment, which
Somme?
is battalion? What battalion survived the Battle of the Somme?
I mean, World War One barely touches me as an American, so I'm much more familiar with
It,
World
it
War
was it
Two.
was it was the Irish
But I'm
regiments.
going to assume it was an Irish regiment,
It
right?
was the
Yeah.
Irish regiments, right? So what happened is because the Irish at that point were so used to rebellion, right? What they did was the orders came in. The British wanted to treat World War One as a Napoleonic battle. They ordered on the Battle of the Somme. They ordered all of their regiments, battalions, to march in formation and take the trenches. That's what
Jesus
they
Christ.
ordered them to do, right?
Oh.
We had an English officer, well, an Anglo-Irish officer, and English men Irish men that were used to rebellion, seen that letter and were like, no, we're not going to do
Yeah.
that.
Screw
What
you,
we
man.
are going to do is our new plan, right, with the Anglo-Irish officer, is we're going to crawl during at nighttime. We're going to get up extra early and we're going to crawl as close as we can to the trench. And just as the mortars go off and all the banging goes off and everything, and the ground gets lit up, we're going to get up and run into the regiment. We're not going to walk in. Sorry, not walk. Sorry, into the trench. Right. So we're going to run into the trench. Once everything lights up, you get up and you run into the trench. Right. And that's what the Irish did. The English, the Scottish, the Welsh, the Canadians wiped because they walked towards the enemy, right? The Irish survived because by the time gun firing started going off, they were pretty much very, very much on top of the Germans. And they pretty much just had to leap in at that point
Right.
and start chopping up the Germans, right? Caught the Germans completely off guard. Everyone else, geez, it turned into a complete and utter failure for everyone else. And what had to happen to the Irish is they had to do a tactical withdrawal back because there was not enough battalions to support the Irish.
Right. Well,
So,
the Battle of the Somme is a gruesome meat grind. I mean, all of the entire history of World War One is just an unnecessary tragedy. It's the war that absolutely didn't need to happen at all.
mm,
Not even the tiniest bit. It was a rich man's war to have a glorious battle and then be home by Christmas. And then 4 years later, we're still rotting in the trenches, not a metaphor.
but
So,
they thought the British went into World War One thinking they were going to reenact the Napoleonic War in
oh,
Europe.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
absolute
yeah.
insanity. Like,
All this glory. We're going to cover ourselves in glory, boys. And then we'll be home by Christmas. It'll be grand. Right.
mm,
And it was none of those things. It was, yeah, World War One just makes me so sad. It just, World War Two was terrible. World War One makes me sad because it didn't need to happen at
mm,
all. There was no reason for it. It was just a lot of death for no reason.
mm.
Yeah.
So for Easter, we talked about the fact that there was a whole load of Easter eggs because, well, actual eggs because we'd been
Yeah.
collecting them during Lent because we weren't allowed to eat them for 40
Right.
days and 40 nights. Also, on top of that as well, we were talking about the fact that Easter is spent arguing between what we identify now as Roman Christians and Insular
Yep.
Christians, arguing over the fact. By the way, the South of Ireland, where I was from, we are 100% by default supported Rome, right? So where I was from, we supported Rome by default, which was ran by the Oenachta at the time in Cashel against the ENL. So the ENL were the High Kings of Ireland, but their equivalent, their political rival during these assemblies and stuff was the Oenachta, where I am from. So by default, we'd rock up to these assemblies at Easter and stuff, and we'd be like, "Oh, you guys are wrong. You're celebrating the wrong day. You guys are stupid. We should be the High Kings of Ireland." So during this whole thing, when all this arguing is going on, we're just like, no, we just will not listen to what the ENL have to say about the Easter controversy. Rachel, is there anything else that would happen during Easter?
So, it depends on where you are, right? So the Lent is obviously a period of solemnity, and actually I have a passage here. So I've got the selected letters of Alessandra Strozzi. She's a woman who lived in a turbulent, if there was any other turbulent time in Italian history, an unturbulent time, but she lived during the 15th century in Florence. And her family, the Strozzi, fell on the wrong side of the Medici of conflict that initially banished Cosimo de' Medici from the city. And then when he came back a couple of, not very long later, after having paid the right people to allow him back into the city, he basically took his revenge, not violently, but by having all of his political enemies banished. And the Strozzi were on the other side of that. And her sons end up getting banished, even though they're like teenagers, because they're male. And she's a widow at that point. And so her sons end up living in exile in Rome and or Naples for almost the rest of her life. And that's decades. And so we have dozens, if not hundreds of letters that have survived magically from her to her sons and back again. And so they're a really interesting document into daily life of a patrician woman, but not someone at the top. She was not a princess of Florence, right? She wasn't a Medici. And so they document a lot of really workaday things, like, for instance, I know you really like this kind of bread, so I had our people make this bread and I'm sending it to you in the shipment. I'm sending you some undershirts because I know yours are probably getting worn out, right? Really, really, really prosaic stuff. But for me, that's what's the most interesting details about history. And in one of her letters towards Easter in April 10th, 1451, she says, I haven't written you since December because I've had a stomach complaint and I haven't been able to bend over to write. I've been taking medicine for a month and I'm a lot better. If it weren't for Lent, I think I'd be completely cured. Easter will come, God willing, and I'll be better. So she's actually saying that the Lenten fasting has actually had a deleterious impact on her health. And that she's hoping that when Easter comes and she can again eat the full range of foods and get the full range of nutrition, it should actually allow her to heal fully. And until I read that letter, I never thought about the potentially deleterious impact of a medieval style Lenten fast, because that kind of fasting doesn't cause me issues. But it wouldn't surprise me if she's not the only person who, whose constitution suffered because of not being able to eat meat, only being able to eat fish. And maybe she doesn't like fish, so she doesn't eat a lot of it, right? Not being able to eat eggs. Maybe she doesn't like fish. Maybe she would prefer eggs, but she's a pious woman. She's adhering to the strictures. She's not going to allow her bad health to actually pull her away from the path of of good religious observance. So I thought that was a really interesting random thing to mention in this letter to her sons, that she's been so sick that she can't write to them because she can't, and the image of bending over to be able to write the letter, right? Because you have a writing slope. And so you actually have to bend over the writing slope in order to write. And her stomach hurt so much that she couldn't do that. It's like, that's a very visceral, and pun, that's a visceral look into this woman's life that you're not going to get from Great Man History Chronicles.
Yeah, yeah. It's deep stuff. And have you seen as well the whipping of the herring? I just seen it there on,
The
what was it called?
whipping of the herring.
Yeah, the whipping of the herring. Have you heard anything like that before?
No, I have
It
not.
seems to be in Ireland.
No.
Basically, from what I was reading there, by the end of Lent, people were so sick of fish that the meek funeral was called. They used to have a parade where butchers would parade their dead herrings through the streets. This was called the whipping of the herrings, and it allowed crowds to come over and whip before tossing it into the river as a sign of the return of meat of the diet.
That just sounds so hideously wasteful in an era when every bit of food was highly valued. I don't know. What's the primary source for that? That just seems, I mean, I don't know. It seems more likely that they would just preserve them for later use rather than throw them away in the
Mm.
river.
That was by Maria McGowan, and that's over on the RTE player that has it on
But I
there.
mean,
And there's
but
good
do you know like
sources
what
in there.
does it come from a chronicle or what's the actual what's the
Source
actual
itself. It doesn't
yeah
have any sources at the end. It does come from RT, and there is actually some good trustworthy faces in there. I'll have to go through the sources later on, but it's just interesting. I just seen it there over
the
on the
whipping
RT
of the
player popping up there. Um,
no in Florence they actually have they still do to this day they have this massive celebration the Scoppio de Carro
mm,
which is literally the explosion of the cart
mm,
and there's an interesting in essence they have this cart this 16th century carriage the cart the same one they've been using since the 16th century and they actually have this procession from the church of Santo Apostoli, the
mm,
Church of the Holy Apostles, and they have a procession from that church all the way to the Duomo, to the cathedral,
mm.
and then they've got fireworks on this cart,
Oh,
and the bishop lights this mechanical or this wooden uh, dove that's attached to a wire inside the cathedral, and the wire runs all the way outside of the cathedral to the cart.
mm,
And he lights that dove and it moves to the cart and then it lights the fireworks on the cart and then there's this massive firework explosion. If you look up the Scoppio de Carro you can see pictures of it. It's pretty violent and apparently they have been doing this since at, with fireworks since the 16th century.
mm.
Before the 16th century, supposedly, and I say supposedly because I haven't found primary source evidence to back this up,
Yeah.
supposedly they had been doing this kind of procession since the end of the 12th century when one of the Pazzi family, I forget which one, that he went on crusade to Jerusalem and
Mm,
he apparently he came back with in quotes 3 flints from the Holy Sepulchre, by
mm,
which I think it means he basically carved off 3 pieces of stone from the Holy Sepulchre to use as flints.
mm,
Flint for sparking, flint and steel for making fire.
mm.
And I mean, talk about the usual tourist vandalism. Well, I'm just going to take a couple of pieces of this historic monument back with me. No one will notice, except that when everyone takes a couple of pieces of the historic monument back with them, it gets noticeable.
Ah,
So he actually takes these back to Florence and he gives them to the city. And they basically start this procession whereby they use one or all of these flints to light the fire
ah.
that then is used in this procession. So supposedly they're still using the flints to light this fire that Matteo Pazzi, maybe I don't remember which of the Pazzi it was, that he brought back with him from Jerusalem.
Mm.
So supposedly this tradition has continued since then, and it used to just be this giant candle
Yeah.
basically that they would put in the center of the cart and that would get lit with the holy flints,
Mm.
and then they would use that candle, that big giant candle, to light all of the other candles for the celebration of the Easter of the Easter observances, because then, of course, it was the flints that were part of the Holy Sepulchre, which then created that fire. And so then by propagating, the fire from this central candle, that made all the other candle light extra holy, or all the lamps and candles that were lit by that extra holy. I don't know if there's still, if they've got fireworks, I can't imagine they're lighting the candles for the churches from the fireworks. So I'm not certain how it works modernly. But apparently in the 16th century, I'm assuming probably with the arrival of the dukes in Florence, that they decided to go with something more bombastic and more glorious than just a big candle.
Herring, but at the same time, because I know other people agree with you there, Rachel, that it is kind of a waste of meat to be kind of just whipping it across the street and then chucking it into the river. But I think the problem with herring in Ireland, and bunnies as well, is the fact that if you're not eating them for 40 days, as in going out to hunt them and stuff, I think they breed overkill and they end up destroying crops and stuff as well, don't they? So I think there's probably at that point too much herring and bunny, because I know in Ireland we constantly have to keep them on watch, especially farmers, because there are times when they overbreed, and also on top of that as well, they go in there and attack crops. They, especially.
Yeah. So it depends. It depends if rabbits have natural predators or not in Ireland. But with the herring, you can preserve them. They can be salted, they can be smoked, they can be dried. They can be gelled, put in aspic and be preserved. There's a lot of ways to preserve them. I'm not saying you shouldn't fish them in mass quantities necessarily to keep the population controlled, but just throwing it away just does not make sense to me. Like doing something with it and then preserving it, I can see that. But doing something with it and then just throwing it into a river or something, that's going to make a stinky river also, by the way.
Maybe it's just one herring. Maybe they turn
maybe
into
maybe there's like one symbolic herring. I could see that. But I just can't see like people taking barrels of herring and dumping them into a river.
Yeah, I think I'm going to just guess, and I'm just assuming it's just going to be one herring. They're going to do that too, instead of doing it with the thousands of them. Because even in the source, because I'm actually reading this, going back over the source now, and it still talks about the amount of eggs they'll be eating on that day and stuff. But it could be the case with bunnies and rabbits as well, maybe.
Right.
Also, to do with the meat as well, they seem to have cake. So they seem to be able to bake it into some form of a cake. I don't know what kind of bunny meat cake you would eat. I don't know.
Medievally, so what most people imagine now as cake didn't exist before the 18th century, because what most people imagine as cake now is fluffy and delicate and has a light crumb. And that's the consequence of chemical leaveners, which were invented in the end of the 18th century, sodium bicarbonate. And that's the earliest documented use of chemical leaveners in baking in the West that I have found. So the kind of so-called cakes that medieval people would have been much denser, or they would have been yeast raised. They would not, and therefore they would be chewy. They wouldn't have that kind of fluff that you get from a chemical leavener. So fish cakes were probably more likely to be a fritter, actually. So it's more likely to be, either pieces of meat chopped up and made into a patty and either fried in a pan or fried in deep fried, right? Breaded, possibly dipped in batter. Like that's more likely to be what a fish cake would be in a medieval source. If you find references to fish cakes, it's not a sweet thing; it's a savory thing.
But then I wonder, like, if they're throwing it into the river, does that go back to a ritual? Because I do know the Irish, and we talked about this before as well, how the Irish and Celtic people in general have a tendency of throwing things into bogs and rivers. Like you can see that
they do.
King Arthur's sword, where King Arthur's sword is thrown into the river for a goddess to take it away. Is it a case of it's a sacrifice? Oh, here's your sacrificial hare into the river, and then it becomes going into the medieval period. It becomes then a kind of what's it called, tradition that they have in that area, that they don't even question why they throw hares into the river anymore. They just kind of do it for good luck, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I can, that absolutely, that tracks for me. It's like, we've just always done this. We
Yeah.
now do this. We still do it. It's just what we do at Easter.
Yeah.
I could see that. And I mean, it would make sense. I could see the symbolism of sacrificing, in quotes. I can't do air quotes right now, but of
I'll
of
do it for you.
of
There you go.
thank you, of sacrificing a a herring, putting it, tossing it into the river as a way to sort of chum the waters,
Mm,
right? To give the water goddess an offering so that she gives back tenfold, kind of thing,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
Like that could be the origin of that practice, and it just got continued, as many traditions do, no matter whether what the new system of belief is. A lot of
Mm.
traditions just kind of persevere, and it just became something people did. And it wouldn't surprise me that if you ask someone in, let's say, the 13th century, why are you doing that, they probably wouldn't be able to give the answer that attests to its origins at all.
Do you want me to be rotten to you, Rachel? There's actually Brazilian Jiu Jitsu that's done in America. And there's certain traditions around. I can't remember specifically. I think it's something to do with the what was a belt or something. But what happened was that judo had gone over to Brazil, and
Right,
they had slightly adjusted some of the stuff, and it eventually became Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, right?
right,
And then from there, it went from Brazil up to America, and it became, well, it's still kind of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, although some
yeah.
people have adjusted it to Planet Jiu Jitsu instead of Mother Mad stuff. But there's certain customs that they do, and I can't remember what it was, but they were doing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu one day, and a Japanese person came. And he knew the answer to it, but he was just kind of curious if the Americans knew why they were doing something. And
Right,
so he asked, like, "Why do you do that thing?" Because they were doing it slightly wrong. So he asked them,
right.
like, why are you doing that thing? And they were just like smacked. They were like, I don't know. And he was just curious, like, why would you do that thing? Then no, I can't
Right,
remember what it was. I think it was something to do with the belt. It was like the taping of the belt or something. And he was like, "Why would you tape your belt if, first off, you're not going to do it for the practical reason of doing it, and secondly, you're doing the tradition of it slightly wrong?" And they were just like, "Well, we got taught by a Brazilian person, and he got taught by a Japanese person." And so it kind of became a Chinese whispers why to once it came back to them. And that was only what, last year. I remember watching that on
yeah,
the live stream, where they just had a Japanese guest in, and he was just gobsmacked that these Americans in California were doing this thing, and they didn't know why they were doing it. And I think it was
right.
just taping their belt. It was something as simple as just taping their belt. And he was like, the reason why a person would tape your belt, I think this is the reason. Someone will probably correct me in the comment section, but I think it was the taping of the belt, and it's down to your grade system. So when you hit your blacks, it becomes, you then go into your first dan, your second dan. Like you're not master yet. Like master is 10th dan black, right? Everyone thinks that master is first dan black. It's not.
Right,
It's actually 10th dan black. But the Americans treat the first dan black as the master belt. So when anytime somebody says, "Oh, I'm a master, I'm a black belt," that's actually wrong. That's actually just a halfway point within your education of martial arts. But
right,
regardless, these Americans were treating black belt as the master belt, and then
right.
after that, they were adding in extra stuff. And this Japanese guy who came to them, he was like, "Okay, this is strange. Like, you explain to me why you're taping your belt." And
Right.
they did, this specific gym just didn't know why they were taping their belt. I think most gyms probably, especially at this stage, probably know. But yeah, it just reminds me of what you were saying there, how information passes, and then it gets to a point where it just becomes a tradition within that clique or group. Like,
Yep. Yeah. So we have some people leaving. Tomikor, thank you so much. Sleep well. Tell your daughters they're very sweet. Appreciate that compliment. Unfortunately, I can't really scroll back in the comments right now, so I'm confident we probably missed some questions there.
most of it, people are, they're going off to sleep. Good night, everybody who's going off to sleep.
Good
Thank you
night,
so
everyone.
much for staying up. I'm assuming it's the New Yorkers are going off to bed, are they?
Probably our
Yeah.
East Coast people are going to bed now, I would assume.
And
Yeah.
any late nighters from England and Ireland and Scotland and Wales as well, I probably have gone off to bed as well. And there's some people jumping in to join us. Good evening to everyone who's jumping onto us now.
Yeah.
Myself and Rachel are just talking about various topics, in particular the fact we're now on Good Friday going into Easter. So we've started talking about various Easter subjects and topics. And also on top of that as well, we're going to be talking about our short that got really, really big yesterday. I think, how many views is it on? Is that like
It's up to,
27?
I mean, it's up to 120,000 views on Instagram.
Yeah,
It's several thousand views. It's always interesting how some videos go more viral on
oh,
certain platforms than others,
yeah,
right? It's only in the 6 or 7 thousand range on YouTube, but on Instagram, it has gone gangbusters crazy viral. I've never
mm,
had a video that I posted go that viral on Instagram.
yeah,
It's crazy. But
mm,
it brings up the idea of the lies that were taught about history, or the obfuscations, or the dissembling that is often conveyed in the teaching of history, especially in middle school and high school, right?
mm,
At that level, it's presented as something far too simplified, and often history is presented in a very sanitized way.
mm.
So, we one of the things that you and I intend to do is to get back to the original sources and try to cast a light onto the truth of the matter, whatever that truth is. Truth is such a touchy word these days.
Oh, stop.
But the point is to not just accept what we've been told, but to question whether it's correct or not.
Mm.
That's the true study of history, is always asking, do we know? Do we really know what we think we know?
Yeah, that's also very true. And it's kind of a funny thing how actually I was reading some of the comments because there were some really great people in the comment section putting down some insanely good sources in the comment section on Instagram. And one particular person literally sourced the term the Great Hunger or the Great Famine. It's actually a play
Right.
on words of Irish. It actually means both Great Hunger and Great Famine. I can't remember specifically the Irish word he was using. But when people are turning around and say, oh, but that's still a famine, that's actually a play on words of the Irish. The reason why, if
Right.
you were to directly translate it, it means great hunger. But the way the Irish is, it translates to also great famine. So that's why it says great famine or great hunger. But Irish people don't want it to be, especially academic level. Academic level have proven that referring it to as a potato famine is incorrect, because the reason why they didn't have food wasn't just down to the failure of potatoes. It
Yeah.
justified British what the Brits were doing, but it wasn't the fault of the potato. There was already food, plenty of
Yep.
food in Ireland already. There was already plenty of meat in Ireland. There was
Yep.
already plenty of vegetables in Ireland, and
Yep.
there was
Fish.
already
There were
plenty of
fish.
fish. Yeah, there was
For
already
God's
plenty of
sake.
fish in Ireland, but it was physically taken by the British. What
Yep.
happened is that the Irish had fought a rebellion in 1798 and 1803, and they were subjugated. And originally, we had an Irish Parliament. It was Lord Edward Fitzgerald who was he was Prime Minister at the time of the Irish Parliament. He was shot and
Yep.
assassinated by the British, and then the British went on to occupy Ireland.
Mm.
And it wasn't even like, oh, we're just taking over. It turned into two very violent rebellions. One in 1798, where the British, they didn't capture prisoners of war and brought them into prison. Because they branded them as rebels, they went on to torture them and
Ah,
execute them
execute them as
violently as
traitors,
well.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Violently executed them. They tried to
Uh,
have the leaders of the rebellion hung, drawn, and quartered, but the
ah,
leaders were actually related to royal monarchies in France and Britain. So they couldn't, they would get into serious trouble. So they changed their execution of being hung, drawn, and quartered to being hung. And then they quartered their bodies afterwards to keep the
I
British
mean,
happy.
that's a kindness.
Yeah,
This sounds. I know this sounds terrible to say, but that's an improvement,
yeah,
because being hanged, drawn, and quartered is a, oh my God, awful way to die,
yeah,
because you are alive and conscious for a lot of that process. And the drawing is
mm,
the drawing out of your intestines.
yeah,
So, yeah, yeah. Hanging them until they're dead and then quartering them symbolically, big improvement on the
yeah.
process.
Well, that's what they eventually did to Robert
Right.
Emmer, because at that point, most of the what was it called? The leaders of the rebellion, which, by the way, as we were saying yesterday, somebody was like, oh, they were Irish Catholic. No, they weren't. The leaders were either Church of Ireland or Presbyterians, right?
Right.
The reason for that is because Catholics were already banned from the Irish Parliament. They were
Yep.
banned from the Irish Parliament from British pressure. So the British didn't want Catholics because they didn't want to be invaded from Ireland into Britain. So there was a whole load of wars to do with the were called the William Knight and Jacobite Wars.
Yep.
And the end result of the William Knight and Jacobite Wars, which you guys know from the show Outlander, the famous
Mm.
show with the, your man from the kilts who runs away to America. The end result of that war was that the Irish Parliament promised that they wouldn't bring in any more Irish Catholics because the Irish Catholics would rebel, and then they would invite the
Right.
Catholic Church, was the Austrians over, and they would invite the French Catholics and the French Spanish
Yeah.
over, and then they would invade England. Right, which is a great idea. I think everyone should do that. But regardless, as part of that agreement, not only would they agree not to invite any of those foreigners over, but they would also not have any Catholics in the parliament. So the leaders of the rebellion in 1798 and 1803, the majority of them was a Presbyterian and Church of Ireland. They were not Irish Catholic. So this
which
whole
which
idea,
which I didn't know any of this until very recently.
Mm.
Because again, this is history that doesn't get taught in
Yeah.
America, because they're not in world history. We barely even touch on Ireland. There's a mention of Ireland. There's the in quote again air quotes potato famine,
Mm.
as that's what it's called in our history books. Right? We hear about the quote unquote potato famine, and then we hear about the 1916 Easter Rebellion, and that's kind of it, right?
Yeah.
That's it. That's all we learn.
Which is funny because of the amount of Irish Catholics that are in America. Now, in saying that, you guys do have a lot to cover with American history anyway,
We
especially
do.
with the likes of the American Civil War. Like, that takes up a good bit of history, especially local history and stuff. Well,
Yeah, I
when I
mean,
was over in the States.
honestly, American history is when I was doing American history in high school, and I was in an advanced placement class.
Mm.
I would say we spent 25% of the time on the American Revolution and 70% of the time on the Civil War.
Mm. Why does the Civil War take up so much space?
Oh, it's because it's still taking up space now.
Oh,
The Civil War and its aftermath is unfortunately coming back to bite us big time in the ass
no.
because we didn't do. Phil, do you want me to get the trolls? Do you want me to track the trolls?
Fecky,
I can.
go for it. Go on.
I can.
We've got
I
the
can.
views in.
I will. I'm about to boost our viewership by tenfold by saying what I'm about to say because we didn't squash the South the way we should have after the Civil War. We let them. Rutherford B. Hayes sold the country out because he wanted to get the electoral votes from those piece of shit Dixiecrats who were racist, white, rich, fat cats. Who then he undid Reconstruction. He undid Reconstruction. We spent years trying to make the South a hospitable place for people of color. And he undid it all. And so overnight, we withdrew all of the troops from the South. We withdrew all of the people who were enforcing the civil liberties of Black people. And, that the Ku Klux Klan, the Daughters of the Confederacy, they all started rewriting history. They started putting up all those garbage monuments to traitor officers who violated their oath to the Constitution. I've got some feelings about this. So we are still dealing with the aftermath, and we're dealing with it more than ever now in the current administration than we ever dealt with it before. So the problem is that we are still being actively haunted by the Civil War.
Well, everyone agrees with you anyway, so that's the main thing.
Yeah. If we start getting some real bots and trolls, Philip, I apologize. But on the other hand, all of those people who leave deleterious comments and act like assholes are just promoting our channels, aren't they?
Well, that's true. You bitch about the South, I bitch about the Brits. It's all good. But I have no problems because I actually lived in England for a good bit, and I have no problems with English people. In fact, if you ask most English people what they think about Ireland, they think Ireland should be unified, and they think that Irish people should have nothing to do with England, and England should have
mm,
nothing to do with Ireland. So
mm,
most English people fully agree with me. The problem
yeah,
is, and most Irish people always highlight this, the problem is with the Irish part was it the British Parliament, not the English people. So I always
yeah,
try to, once I get into these discussions, I always get into that because I actually agree with what most English people have to say on the topic. The problem is that Parliament is, completely mad in the head. And I know I'm going to be talking to the already converted in the comment section because most Americans are looking at the British Parliament right now, squashing English freedom of speech, and scratching their head, going, "What the hell are you doing?" Like the British Parliament is mental right now. Do you know?
yeah, yeah. It's and I think it's important. That's kind of a difference between in any country
Mm,
between the people, the everyday
yeah,
people, and the government,
yeah,
right? Like I don't hate Russians at all.
yeah.
Putin is a piece of shit. He needs
Mm,
to go. His oligarchs, they're all pieces of shit. They are bovine fecal matter. They all
mm,
need to go. Iranians are awesome people, but they've had a pretty terrible government for a
mm,
while, which does not justify anything that America is doing. America should fucking get out of there. That is not our business anyway. Um,
yes. Yeah.
there's North Koreans, actual North Koreans. I meet many of them here as refugees in South Korea. They're great people. They're
Mm.
people, right? But Kim Jong Un is a crazy piece of shit.
It
So
is.
so we have to remember, we have to try to distinguish between the government or the regime that controls a country and its people, and we have to
Mm,
remember that as an American, I'm one of these people, right? I'm embarrassed
mm,
about my country these days, hideously embarrassed and very apologetic, but thankfully when I go places, people don't blame me for the shit that's happening in Washington,
mm.
right? So we have to remember that the people are not the same thing as the government. And very often the people don't have the control and influence that maybe they should have over their government.
Mm,
So,
mm, mm.
oh,
That's true.
you've got someone you need to ban, Philip.
Is that my side?
Frank
Don.
Walsh. Yeah, that piece of bovine fecal matter is there. Yeah.
One
Yeah.
second.
Goodbye. Goodbye, Frank. I'm so sad. I'm so glad that I've triggered you. You have microphalacy, don't you? Yeah, you're micropholic, so you need to take your little dick syndrome and go somewhere else. Goodbye.
But what was I gonna bloody say as well? Oh yes, the what was it called? The Native Americans in the South. Yeah, that history of the Native Americans before the arrival of the likes of the Spanish, and also it's just somebody else in the comment section was just talking about the Native Americans up around the Florida, Alabama region just before the arrival of
Right.
the what's it called? Was it the English that rocked up first around Florida? I'm sure it's the Spanish that rocked up
Spanish. It
first,
was the
isn't it? Yeah.
Spanish.
Mm,
Ponce de Leon was the first conquistador
mm,
to show up in
yeah,
in Spain. He in search of the Fountain of Youth, ironically,
yeah.
um, in the swampland that is Florida.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Did we get him? Did we?
He's
Yeah.
gone on my side. He's gone.
Oh, okay. He's gone on your side. Good. Yeah. I see a lot of laughter coming from people. I'm assuming that's my reference to microfallacy. Um, um, anyway, someone asked a while ago, and I don't know if they're still out there. What was I doing? So I'll just take this pause to show you. The thing I was doing with my hands was finger lip braiding. I was making laces, and these were exactly the kind of laces that can be used to lace up garments for men and women. And
Mm,
so I'm just making a whole bunch of them like this for Ryan's new ensemble because he's broken almost all of his points, so we need to make more. Anyway, that was a question from a while ago. I don't know if they're still there, but if they are, all the better. Chick needs to go back on her meds, bitch. You can't handle me on my on a good day.
stop.
Anyway, yeah,
Dance cake. The cake dance. This is on Easter in Ireland. I just seen something called the cake dance. This was a competitive dance where the prize was a sweet um, carrot cake. I'm assuming this is more from the 19th century because I don't think
yeah,
there's any carrot cakes during the what was it called? Bum, bum,
the Middle
bum.
Ages. I haven't.
Middle Ages.
Yeah, I haven't. I've not seen references to. I've read hundreds of recipes from across Europe. I've read archaeological reports about foodstuffs left over and found. I've read accounts of feasts. I have personally never seen a reference to a carrot cake, and especially not a carrot cake like people would understand. That being said, there's a bit of a hole in our understanding about bread
Mm.
um, from the Middle Ages because almost very few manuals of cookery or cookbooks actually provide recipes for bread,
Ah.
and that's because baking was not cooking.
Mm.
Baking, bakery, the art of bakery was a separate thing. Pastry making was a separate culinary art. So apparently, what the foodstuffs that bakers were making didn't qualify for these beautifully illuminated and calligraphed collections of recipes,
Mm.
possibly because it was considered to work a day at that
Okay.
stage. We hadn't reached the stage of artisanal breads, right?
Mm.
Artisanal in that era means it's a baker making it, but all bread is made by bakers
Mm.
and not in a factory in the Middle Ages. So for all we know, maybe there was a kind of bread that had shredded carrot in or grated carrot in it. Maybe. I haven't seen references to it, but a carrot cake in the Middle Ages would have been more like a roll, a bread roll with carrot in it, maybe lightly sweetened. It could be an enriched bread. I have seen recipes for egg and milk enriched rolls, kind of like challah bread.
Mm.
So that could have been a thing hypothetically. I just haven't seen references to it. But if any of you out there in the comments have seen references to medieval, not modern, so pre 1500, to specify your terms, pre 1500 references to sweet bread that has carrots in it, that would be very interesting for me to hear because I'm not omniscient. I don't know everything at all. The more I know, the less I know, actually. So maybe there's a source out there I haven't seen.
Mm. 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 Also, I was reading there, once again, it was highlighting the fact that children were put in charge of looking after the eggs during Lent in
Mm,
Ireland. And because the
interesting.
children were put in charge of looking after the eggs during Lent, they would often decorate the eggs in various ways, including painting them and also putting decoration all over them. Painting. I wonder during the medieval period, would children have access to paints that easy? How would they
No.
decorate the eggs?
No, paints were expensive in the Middle Ages. Paints
Yeah.
and dye stuffs were expensive in the I mean it's yes, there were not the okay. Paints were expensive, pigments were expensive.
Mm.
Natural dye because it's not a pigment needs to be processed.
Mm.
You can't you can't just go out into nature and just find a pigment. It has even if it's dirt, you have to process it in such a way that you extract the pigment from the soil to get ochre, for
Mm.
instance.
Mm. Mm.
So I haven't found references to children painting eggs in the Middle Ages. I
Yeah.
have found references to painted eggs
Mm.
in the court of King John.
Yeah.
He has painted eggs. So I know I have evidence for painted eggs, decorated eggs being part of the at least the very least the English Easter tradition. I
Mm.
haven't necessarily found an equivalent in Italy from this era, and by necessarily I haven't found medieval references to egg painting in say Florence in
Mm.
this era in the medieval period or in what some people call the Renaissance.
Yeah.
But John had decorated eggs, and he had some really richly decorated eggs during his Easter festivities, like gilt, covered in gold. So he did some really serious stuff. And if I recall correctly from the expense account, he actually had a bunch of eggs gilt, and something in my brain was triggering that he was to actually give them out to some of his favorite courtiers,
Mm.
right? Like they were to be given out as Easter gifts, basically.
Oh, nice.
But don't hold me to that latter part because I didn't even think about talking about medieval Easter until you said, yeah, we should talk about Easter
It was only
yesterday.
an hour before,
Yesterday. So I
Yeah.
haven't brushed up on my Easter festivities. To be frank, in a lot of the chronicles that I read, the Easter festivities don't play a big part in them, curiously.
Mm.
Christmas gets talked about a lot in medieval chronicles and in letters because it's like 12 days of just pure party.
Mm.
but I think because Easter is at the end of a time of solemnity, and a big part of the Easter celebration itself is extreme solemnity. It's it's not as sexy. The chroniclers don't find it as sexy a time to write about.
Mm,
And probably also because Christmas is a time when people get crazy.
mm,
Seriously, they engage in acts of wanton hedonism all over the place. That makes for a much more interesting read
mm.
than Easter probably did. This is just me theorizing why there seem to be fewer chronicles talking about Easter celebrations than about Christmas celebrations from the Middle Ages, but it kind of makes sense. You know, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Easter apparently, despite being a very involving a lot of blood, apparently didn't bleed enough to lead, I guess, in Chronicles.
When you're saying, just back up to the comment section there, when you're saying did the Persians painted their eggs,
Oh,
are
I have
you
no
talking
idea.
about? Yeah, yeah, yeah. We have no idea about that one. Why were they painting their eggs? Well, I suppose there's still Christians living in Persia, isn't there? So I
I mean, yeah,
suppose
there are
maybe.
absolutely, yeah, there were.
Yeah,
I mean, Zoroastrians, Christians. It's not just Muslims living in
yeah,
Persia
I
in the Middle
forget that.
Ages.
Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, but but
Um,
but I don't know anything about. I know nothing, and I mean real goose egg nothing about
mm.
Christian practices in medieval Persia. I know more about Muslim practices in medieval Persia than I do about medieval Christian practices in Persia. So
Yeah.
sorry, guys, can't answer that.
Yeah. Oh God, my brain went out. Yeah. Could you just expand on that one? Because I actually am super curious about
Hmm.
Christian practices in Persia during the medieval period and why were they painting their eggs? Is it exactly what's going on in Ireland where you have so many eggs that are being looked after by children and it's the children because the children are looking after them, they're then decorating the eggs. Is that what's going on? When it comes down to the painting of eggs in Persia. That is the fact that children are put looking after them. Somebody else as well, if I try to find a comment section as well. Oh, yeah, they're talking about wealthy families would have painted the eggs for sure. I could imagine that, to be honest with you. Like if you have the O'Briens who have access to a lot of stuff that's happening in Europe and England. And as you said there, that's happening inside the Tudor court, perhaps. I
No,
could
not the
see the
Tudor court. To
oh,
John's court.
yeah,
John,
King John's court.
John the Worst, as many people call him.
He was, wasn't it? Especially
Well,
King John, because King John and O'Brien had an interesting relationship. Maybe the likes of the higher up clans, maybe their children probably did that, especially to show off their status to the other children. Maybe,
right.
theory. I'm just kind of chucking out there.
I mean,
So maybe,
it could be. But also again, like children painting eggs. That that's it's just the materials would have been very expensive. I mean, there's a reason that this appears in John's expense accounts.
yeah.
That's the King of England.
Mm,
There is a way with the person who knows well enough. There are weeds, of course, that would produce dyestuffs.
yeah.
Broom would produce yellow in Ireland. You could. I wouldn't want to dye my egg in woad blue because woad is produced with fermented urine. So
Yeah.
I'm not certain that's a route you want to be going with your egg.
Mm.
Because those eggshells are not impermeable actually. So maybe not. So
I
maybe there
just
was a way to cheaply produce a dye stuff and cheaply and easily, because also I can't imagine these children knowing the science of extracting dye stuffs from plants, right? So I would want to know the primary source for that. What is the primary source that says children were the ones who were dyeing the eggs?
yeah.
It's always about the primary sources for me. There's a
For
lot of
sure.
there's a lot of bad pop history floating around.
Someone else is also saying that it happened in Ukraine as well, that children were painting eggs. Is that a source from the 19th century as well? Especially now that Rachel's like,
Yeah.
where's the sources? I need the sources.
Yeah, I just,
Um, because,
we can't assume that because people have do it now and have done it for a decades, or even a century, or since sometime in the 19th century, you can't assume automatically. You can't just backdate it to the Middle Ages.
mm,
A lot of people assume that food in I just found a late of one of my followers, Kaylee, if you're out there, thank you for sharing this with me, an early 17th century Transylvanian cookbook, a cookbook that dates to 1603 from Transylvania. And the dishes, there's hundreds of recipes or dishes described in this manuscript. And not a single one of them sounds very much like any of the dishes that come from that region now. Oh. So we can't assume that because it's a traditional dish, that it's something that dates back centuries, because a lot of traditions are actually much more recent.
Yeah. Yeah, they're bang on right. The comment section is right, actually. It originated from Christians in Persia and Egypt who would paint their eggs for, what was it called? And they actually believe it may be pre-Christian as well. But the Christians of Persia and Egypt during the High Middle Ages used to paint their eggs at Easter. And it was a sign to show off the wealth and status. And this custom made it to England in 1290. So on Christmas of 1290, King Edward I painted 450 eggs to show off his status, and he painted them in gold to show his high status.
Oh, right. It was Edward, not John. I just, again, I didn't get to prepare for this at all, everyone. Like, I'm going based on of information I read a year ago for Easter last year.
It could be King John, but this is the Easter custom of painting the eggs. Was Edward I who painted them in gold? I think it's gold leaf color, whatever that is.
Gold. It would be gilt in gold leaf, yeah.
And what was it called? This was also became a major part of the Slavic culture as well. And you guys are right; it was done in Kiev, the settlement of Kiev, and also the major settlements of Poland, because at the time Poland was fractured into 5 barons that would fight over the kingship of Poland.
Where are you getting where are you getting this information?
Wikipedia.
Oh no, baby, come on, Philip, we're better than that, man.
Let me quickly click on their one.
So everyone, the reason I'm really suspect about Wikipedia is because anyone can write anything there, and you don't even have to provide good documentation for your sources. And a lot of things that end up on Wikipedia end up being recycled back pop history. Or these days, the worst part is people are actually taking ChatGPT results and plugging them into Wikipedia entries. So we're getting this cycle of garbage being redigested into more garbage. So show me a primary source and then we'll talk.
And then the source behind that one then is the yorkpress.co.uk, where they have an article from 2020.
Right.
The history behind the Easter pieces, eggs, York. Okay, so it's just what was it called? A journalist,
right.
Stephen Louse, from the York Press, who is investigating the what was it called? The history of Easter in York.
Right. Well, that's going to be York. That's not going to be Kiev or these other places, right? I just again, I don't trust anything anymore unless I see a chronicle. Honestly, we live.
You need to be like that,
right? We live in such an era of horrible misinformation, and like I said, garbage that's getting digested to produce more garbage. That I don't trust anything unless I see a primary source, and I definitely don't trust anything that's a tradition. Because I know for a fact that most traditions aren't really that old, at least as they're practiced now, right? You can have a general act of decorating eggs, for instance, but that doesn't mean that they were dyed or they were painted. Decoration can take many forms. So just because people dye them now doesn't mean that's how they always decorated them, or just because people now paint them, that doesn't mean how they were always decorated. So I don't trust anything unless I see an piece of archaeological evidence, ideally, combined with ideally primary sources discussing it. Ideally, a manual that actually provides instructions from the era on how to do the thing. Now that being said, there's something being triggered in my memory. Again, I didn't get a chance to do any research for this, everyone, because Philip only said yesterday, let's talk about Easter.
It's a great idea. It makes good life streaming.
I didn't get a chance to look in I have at least 2 art manuals from the Middle Ages that provide copious instructions for not only making pigments and gesso and sizes, they also provide instructions for how to decorate different things. And there's something in my memory that's triggering. It's either from Theophilus from the 12th century or from Cennino Cennini from the 15th century, something about decorating eggs, about a way in which to decorate eggs, to paint them or apply pigment to them or something. But again, I didn't get a chance to actually look into that between yesterday's topic suggestion and now. So
What was the best? No, I fully 100% agree with you, to be honest with you, Rachel. And I think everyone should question everything, to be honest with you,
yeah,
because what was it called? Even yesterday, people were turning around and says, "Oh, but I question the academics," and I'm like, "You should." Like,
yeah,
why does everyone feel like they're rebelling against the system when they turn around and says, "I question the academics"? The academics, I don't know about England, and I'm not going to go down the route of England because of reasons that I won't go into right
right,
now. But in Ireland, academics question other academics. Academics do not get on with other academics in the academic
yep,
world in Ireland. They, well, I wouldn't say they hate each other, but they massively always hugely disagree with each other. Even the way that one person will write a paper and straight away someone will have an entire paper write a complete different paper with cheeky little, the way he writes in a very cheeky way.
yeah,
One, well, what was it called? The person writing this didn't understand that A, B, and C is A, was it Y and Z? But I know why it's Y and Z because I have a such and such a book because I'm so amazing. Sometimes writers write like that, academics between each other. Like they massively disagree with each other and hugely question each other's
right,
what was it called research, and you should as well. When you get an
should,
academic paper, you should question where is this work coming from and what
yep,
is the interpretation of this.
yep,
I do it all the time. In
yep,
fact, one of my fields of expertise right now, I would definitely say after all the living history I've done, is 10th century Ireland, and I massively disagree. Like Claire Downham, for example, right? Dr. Claire Downham. I praise Dr. Claire Downham. Doesn't mean I agree with all of her work all the time. In fact, I massively disagree with a lot of stuff that she writes a lot of the time. I just
yep,
don't go up there and scream it from the top of the hills because I'm not in a position to do so. But it doesn't mean I agree with everything she says. You shouldn't agree with everything I say. You should question everything I say and ask where the sources come from. So when Rachel says that, well, I question Wikipedia, definitely Wikipedia, and I
yeah, definitely
question, what is it called?
Wikipedia,
And I
definitely,
question the yorkpress.co.uk, and I question what Stephen Lars says and his sources. I want to do further research into this to see if is this the case. Do
yeah,
people in the medieval period actually paint their eggs? You should question that and do further
yep.
research into that. I can't say that enough.
Yeah, and I think, there's a difference between screaming at each other and
Yeah.
respectful, reasoned discourse,
Mm,
right? History, people seem to forget, or maybe they're just not aware to start with, that there is no one objective chronicle documenting history.
mm,
That's not how the recording of history has ever worked in any society, except for the Joseon dynasty. And even then, the process of chronicling their history was subjected to an editorial process.
mm,
So there is no such thing as a single chronicle of human history that we just go and reference.
mm,
Oh, so what happened on December 13th, 1312? There is no this day in kind
mm,
of thing. So we have to look at all these different sources, all different kinds of sources. We have to look at letters. We have to look at chronicles. We have to look at saints' lives. We have to look at the archaeology. We have to consider, if we're lucky, we have multiple points of view of the same event. And
mm,
we have to take that all as a whole, and then we have to interpret it. History is, for the most part, an interpretation.
mm.
Right. And that is why our understanding of history is constantly evolving, because new information, happily, is almost constantly coming to light. New angles, new sources that give another dimension to the event in question.
Mm,
And I
sure.
think that's why it's very important for me as a lover and a pursuer of history, that we try to stick as much as possible to the primary sources,
Mm,
which is which is not to say that you shouldn't read Richard Vaughn's Lives of the Dukes of Burgundy. You absolutely should. But what he does that's fantastic is he puts footnotes everywhere in his text. He tells you which the primary sources from which he is drawing that information, or the secondary sources from which he's drawing that information, so that you, as a scrupulous, scrutinizing reader, can then go and check his sources if you want. Right?
Well, definitely, for sure. And what was I saying? Oh, yes, port and starboard. Sorry for ignoring you for so long. You have a question there. When did the pipe, tobacco, smoking, and clay pipes come to Scotland, Ireland, and England? Actually, that's quite famous, isn't it?
Yeah, the end of the 16th century, at least for England. I can't speak for. I'm assuming probably roughly the same time for Scotland, and probably roughly the same time for Ireland.
Well, Ireland, bang on. Because it's the same. What was it called? We had the 9 Years' War. So there's actually I can't remember what year it is, right? So I apologize for that one. But it is around the end of the 16th century.
Yeah, it's like the 1590s, right?
Yeah. You have that famous thing when your man returns back to England with the pipe and the potatoes and all that kind of stuff. From there, because most of those generals were also serving in Ireland against the Irish at the time during the 9 Years' War, which was fought between the Irish Confederacy and the English Tudors. Most of that stuff was, from the get-go brought over, which was the potatoes and the pipe and all that stuff. So, and most of those nobles were within the same clique after the Tudor conquest, because, believe it or not, the 9 Years' War and the Tudor conquest actually ended in stalemate. I've got endless amount of YouTube videos that are like, oh, it ended with Queen Elizabeth taking over Ireland. No, she died. She died before the 9 Years' War could come to a solution. And guess who took over after Elizabeth? It was the Stuarts. The Scottish took over.
Scottish king. Yeah, a Scottish king takes over. James the First, James the Sixth, right? Yeah, and James the First was a vehement anti-smoker. Did you ever see the pamphlet he wrote and published under a pseudonym? So James the First of England, James the Sixth of Scotland wrote a pamphlet condemning pipe smoking as an absolutely disgusting, deleterious habit. He was right. And but when he first published it anonymously, it got no traction. So apparently he republished it as the king, and suddenly it got lots of traction. You can actually, if you look it up, you can actually see it. It was printed. It's a broadside basically, so you can still see it to this day. It's a great pamphlet. Yeah.
We've been massively ignoring poor port and starboard. He's been asking some very inquisitive questions.
Oh yeah.
His second one was, what was work and labor? Watch it yourself now, Rachel. Like in the medieval times now compared to what it was back in the day. So what was work and labor like in medieval times versus now? And what's better and why? What do you prefer, Rachel? Do you prefer work now or back in the medieval period?
I mean, it depends on what kind of job you have now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I would say that for people who are working in factories now, they have it way worse off than people had it in the Middle Ages. People imagine the Middle Ages as this time of endless drudgery and misery and filth, squalor, people sitting around in the mud waiting for progress to happen. But that's just not true. The medieval calendar was full of holidays during which people did not work, during which they celebrated, during which they feasted and danced and sang songs and had a generally good time. So people actually had more leisure time in some cases in the Middle Ages than they do now, depending on the job you have, right? If you're some nomad creator who just does an hour of work a day, then okay, you probably have it better than, or some Instagrammer who's making bank just by doing a single live stream. That's not us, by the way, guys. We are not making bank by doing these live streams. Then yeah, you probably have it better than a medieval person. But I would say that probably on average, it was different. I'm not even certain if you could say it was better. It was different. The medieval pace of life was on the whole much slower. You were everything expected to take more time. No one expected you to rush around and hyper schedule your day. Getting dressed in the morning took time for everyone. people were encouraged to actually do things like, brush their teeth, wash their face, comb their hair in the morning, and then get up and move around slowly to warm up their bodies. That's what physicians recommended. And some cities had free healthcare. Most cities had free healthcare in the Middle Ages. They had hospitals or that were endowed by the wealthy and operated by the monastic communities and the church that were free. They provided excellent, what at the era was top-notch healthcare for anyone. The city of Bologna had over 200 plus physicians on its payroll, operating free clinics across the city. Anyone could go there and seek consultation from a physician, could get advice about hygiene, about how to improve their ailments, about how to live a better and more comfortable life. So what's better? I don't know. I know that medieval people had more holidays.
Yes, that's also very true. And was we Port and Starboard was also asking, were the working class and everyday citizens better off under the monarchy in the United States, and versus what the United States is today? And I heard the USA is the type of republic monarchy. Ooh, just going into deep, what was it called? Way out of my field of expertise, that's for sure.
That is, I mean, so are you, okay, the question is, are we comparing what life was like in the colonies under the British monarchy, under the British Empire, versus what life in the United States is like now? Or are we comparing what life in the United States is like now to what life in England is like now, or in the United Kingdom is like now? Like, those are two different questions. It was a different set of concerns in the 18th century. At the end of the 18th century than we have now. It was a different pace of life. It was a whole different structure. That's before the Industrial Revolution completely changed the way we lived and worked in the West. So, does that come down to the form of government, or is that just a factor of rampant capitalism and the Industrial Revolution? That's a very hard. That's a deep, long conversation that doesn't really have to do with medieval history, which is our focus.
Field of expertise. Yeah, we do talk away about and have an opinion on modern history, but our field of expertise really is medieval history, to be quite honest with you. I think a better question here is also, his follow-up question is Rachel wearing an upper middle class woman would wear during, or are you wearing what the peasant women would wear in the medieval period?
That's a better question. That's a more answerable question, more readily answerable, and involving many fewer hours of debate. So I am actually currently dressed as a 15th century, later 15th century, 1470s to 1490s Florentine, specifically Florence, patrician lady at home. This is the cut of the dress is generally the same as would have been worn by members of the lower socioeconomic strata in Florence in this era, but the fabric is not. This is a rich silk fabric, right? This would not have been worn by everyday women who were working. The cut is very similar, though, and of course, I'm wearing a gem, and that is definitely not a bauble that a woman of a peasant woman or a servant in the lower economic strata would have been able to wear. But yeah, this is me for at-home dress. If I were to actually go out into the world, and also with the kerchief like this, if I were to be dressing to actually go out and engage in society, especially at any kind of official level, like at on a holy day ball or a celebration because some great nobleman is visiting Florence, then I should actually put another very decorative layer over top of this, and my hair should be styled in a very specific and fashionable manner, with curls kind of framing my face, this fringe framing my face, and then my hair taped to the back of my head in a kind of ornate manner, and maybe some jewels or pearls woven into it, braided into it as well. So I'm wearing what I call my Florentine Lululemon. This is my Florentine, Gucci, or maybe my Florentine Gucci tracksuit. I don't know, whatever. Take your pick of your modern designer, but the casual line that they sell instead of the evening wear line that they sell.
For sure. And the comparison is more of the government now versus the monarch in the early during the early medieval was it during the medieval period, medieval
Oh,
times.
oh, uh,
That one's quite funny, all right, because it depends. I'm assuming it's like the English monarchy versus
right.
it's always the default interpretation people have is the English
That's
monarchy
true.
versus the modern day American government, and it depends on the era and what's going on. Like I know for you guys are about to suffer October, November with the rising of taxes and stuff. So I don't think your lives are going to be great in October, November when the taxes start to go overkill. Should I? What was it called? You guys know you're going to get punished soon for all the taxes going up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
not Rachel. Rachel's grand.
Yeah, sure.
Rachel's nice and safe in Korea for a certain amount.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean it's medieval monarchy. Monarchy
life
conjures the
life was
word
quite
the
good in England in the 13th
yeah, I
century.
mean the problem is that the word monarchy does a lot of the thinking
Yeah.
for us, and medieval monarchs did not have the same centralized power and rights in most places that modern monarchs have had,
Yeah.
that early modern monarchs have. We're not Louis the 14th, the Sun King. He was an absolute monarch,
Yeah.
and he centralized power. He set up the model for truly centralized power.
Mm.
Right? All other monarchs started modeling their power systems on him
Yeah.
because he came up with a whole new way of doing it.
Mm.
And so that's not a medieval model of monarchy. Medieval kings were not as powerful as people think they were. And contrary to popular belief, kings were also subject to laws,
Yeah.
and in some cases, wars were fought over this.
Mm.
So at the people, the average common people did not feel the effects of the king and changes in kingship as much as the barons, the royal peers, the nobles did. They're the ones who got drawn up in the Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
right? But your average yeoman or sharecropper or serf, depending on your era, right? They only felt the effects if people came and marauded the countryside and stole their things and or killed them. But
Mm.
they didn't necessarily feel the effects of a king ruling in London directly in the kind of way that people imagine, right? It wasn't Edward the First going through the countryside shouting, "Off with his head, off with his head, off with his head. He has offended me, off with his head." That just didn't happen.
Yeah, they couldn't
So
do it.
yeah,
Especially like if you look at the 13th century, times were quite good in the 13th century, especially for local opinion. Like people actually, when it came down to local politics, Anglo Saxons had a good, what was it called? Better freedom of speech than they do right now in England. Definitely right now in England, believe it or not. And the reason for it is because during, what was it called? When you had the, what was it, the crisis, the Civil War crisis that was happening between Empress Matilda and King Stephen how he got most of his support from the Anglo-Saxons was that he allowed them to continue having their local councils that they had during the early medieval period. And then he forced, when Henry II was taking over after King Stephen had Henry II recognize the Anglo-Saxon
yeah,
councils, which
right,
was great for Henry II at the time because he wanted to live in France. He wanted England to be self-governed. It was the
yeah,
same thing again with what was it called? Richard the Lionheart. Richard the Lionheart didn't care about England. He
and
publicly did not like England and wanted to spend most of his time in France and
yeah,
crusading off in Jerusalem.
yeah,
So once he brought in his tax into the Anglo-Saxons didn't like it, but they had no choice but to pay it. He allowed the Anglo-Saxons to go back to do what they wanted. After that, again, you have what was it called? King John. Now, King John, guess what? King John wanted to do what King John wanted to do by cutting off everyone's heads, which is, off with his head, off with his head. But yet you have the first Barons War, where King John is, he dies on the toilet,
yeah.
and that's the end of him, and
Dysentery for the
yeah,
loss.
And then you have Henry, what was it, Henry III, who was everybody's puppet, do you know?
Yeah,
So you're right. Like, it depends what era you're talking about, because throughout the 13th century, until you get up to Edward the First, now the difference with Edward the First is that he was a traditional, he was more like an early medieval warlord than
yeah,
anything else. It was the case, I'm going to raise a massive military force and start spending the rest of my life marching up and down, smashing everything I can. And if
yeah.
you disagree with me, I'll kill you in the most horrific way possible in front of
But
everybody for my own sadism.
right, but that's not the he didn't care about what people in the fields were saying or
Yeah,
doing, right? It was the aristocrats, right? It's the people at the upper echelons who
yeah.
always were running that risk. So the average
Mm.
person just didn't feel that effect very much. It's you know,
But they
the
did, from of the literature, they didn't care, because the
yeah,
Irish Parliament was trying to write letters to Edward III, and Edward III was like, "You do whatever you want. I don't care.
yeah,
I care about France. You
yeah,
give me a tribute of levy, and I'll let you do whatever you want." Now,
yeah,
don't get me wrong. His son Lionel of Antwerp does go to Ireland and causes a lot of problems
right.
until eventually he, is assassinated somewhere. And what was it called? He is the one that brings in the statutes of Kilkenny. Like, he is the one that's so annoyed that the Irish, and even on top of that, you've looked at the statutes of Kilkenny and you've
I
highlighted that
have.
actually it's much more complicated than just Lionel of Antwerp just hating on the Irish. Now, did Lionel of Antwerp hate the Irish? Yeah, he probably did. Being the what's it called, little rat that he was.
Right, right, right. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like your mileage, as always with the Middle Ages, your mileage will vary. There were systems there were systems of government that gave more people more power in deciding their political fate. There were systems of government, like in Italy. A bunch of cities in Italy in the Middle Ages were still republics,
Mm,
right? They weren't lordships. They weren't part of a feudal inheritance, right? They were republics, and ostensibly
mm,
the people were involved in the ruling of those cities and in making the decisions. Of course, invariably, even when you don't have an aristocracy as such, one ends up being created. That seems to always happen no matter what. But,
mm,
there were laws in place in all of these places that worked to, keep a order and peace and to prevent chaos from just destroying the land and from making the average person's life miserable.
mm.
So but is it better or worse than the modern world? Well, I mean, I definitely generally prefer the modern world as a woman
Oh yeah.
because depending on where you are and when you are in medieval Europe, women may or may not actually have rights to decide their own fate, to decide if they get married, to decide if they can join a convent or if they can own property in their own name, right? If they're if an assault upon their person is actually an infringement of the law,
Mm.
right? There are plenty of places where wife beating was okay as long as you didn't damage her too much. Like
Mm.
that's what some of these rules say. As long as you don't you know don't leave marks on her face or in certain places, and as long as she's not damaged, then it's okay.
Yeah, because you see
So
that in the Brehon laws. I got the Brehon laws right there. That's the first main source, and it says you can punch and kick your wife all you want as long as you don't do it to the face or anywhere that's visible. As long as you
right,
don't ruin her status within the community as a clan as a whole. Yeah, beat you knock the snot over all you want. Well, don't actually knock the snot over. More or less punch her in the stomach. Hit
yeah,
those areas.
yeah,
And that's what it's telling you to do. So you can't turn around and say, "Oh well, Ireland was all equal rights," when you can turn around and chastise your woman anytime you want, and that's the father and the husband. Once the husband
right,
then, what was it called, has access to the daughter, he can punch and kick her all he wants as long as it's done behind closed doors,
yep,
not out in the public. Which is interesting because you do have laws for men as well. Like men, when it comes down to a woman's status, he can't even turn around and say at the pub, it literally says this in the Brehon law, he can't turn around and brag, oh, she likes A, B, and C in the bedroom. If he does that, he could get a divorce. That's taken very, very seriously.
Right. Reputation is very
Yeah,
important,
that's the
clearly.
one.
Right.
The
Yeah. And
status of women for Ireland is so important, but he still says you can kick the crap out of her behind closed doors.
yep. It's so, and again, 1,000 years of history, not a monolith. Europe as a continent, culturally and politically and culturally, not a monolith. So, there is no, well, in the Middle Ages, it was better, because there's no way I can say for that whole 1,000 years it was better or worse. It was different in most cases. And, we as individuals, I guess, could decide for ourselves, well, in which time would I rather live? All things considered, in which time and place. And I'll be frank, I would still rather live now on the whole. Uh, um, as we have vaccines, we have antibiotics. We have readopted, although in the Middle Ages they had good hygiene, it got lost in the modern era, and then only got readopted in the 20th century, basically. But we have laws that treat men and women as equals. We have laws against wife beating. We have laws against SA. We have and that are enforced, right? So yeah, I would still rather live now as a woman. That's not a question. But are there things about medieval life on the whole that were absolutely better? Yes. Medieval people, I think, definitely had a greater, across Europe, and this I will say was true, had a greater sense of community. They had a greater sense of, we are together in this, we need to support each other. And you can see that by reading, interestingly, the miracles of certain saints, like the miracles of Saint Louis, the holy, the king of Louis XII of France, or Louis X of France, who is eventually sainted. And so as part of his canonization process, they interviewed a whole bunch of his contemporaries, of people who lived while he was still alive, and their experiences, or who lived while he was alive, but then after he died and he was sort of being treated like a saint, even though he wasn't a saint yet, they talk about the miracles that were performed by going to his tomb. And these are everyday people. I mean, people on the absolute bottom of society were being interviewed for this. So we actually have the voices of poor people, of beggars, of homeless people, talking about the miracles that they experienced at the hands of Saint Louis. And, we get a sense from the way they talk about their interactions with the other members of their community, that their communities were looking out for them. There's one story in which this poor, and I mean poor in the economic sense of that word, this poor woman is homeless, and her neighbor takes her in and lets her live with him. And she goes out to beg for alms. And on muddy days, he insists that she stay home and gives her some money himself, so that she doesn't have to get dirty. I mean, first off, can you imagine just taking in any homeless woman any homeless person from your community, your local community, just letting them live with you free of charge? By the way. And then on muddy days, you give them some money yourself so that they don't have to get dirty. Right? It was in some ways a better time, and in some ways not a better time.
Yeah, that's also very true. People are asking, Rachel, what are you doing? And is there any way, I suppose because you're stuck in the middle of that, you can't be moving the camera or anything. People just want to have a better look. But I suppose
I'm not certain it will help, because the strings are silk and they're not very visible on the camera. But I am doing something called finger loop braiding, and on my YouTube channel I have a 21-minute tutorial from beginning to end, how to set up the strings, how to manipulate your fingers, how to do the pattern, on how to do this. If you look up braiding beautifully on my YouTube channel, you can find the tutorial. I am in essence making laces, like the lace you see here on my dress, exactly like this one, in fact, because in the Middle Ages, across most of Europe, laces were one of the primary ways of closing garments and or holding them together. So you always need laces. Eventually the laces break and you need to make more. So I am making laces for actually Ryan's 15th century condottiero ensemble. So
Nice. We start finishing up now because we're on the
Yeah.
tour. We're
Yeah,
going on the
we are
tour mark.
approaching the 2 hour mark. Okay, so were there any final other questions that we should address before we ask for final
Oh, there was
questions?
one more thing as well. There was an old law that I saw recently that beating was made illegal at night because it was making too much noise.
Oh, that is interesting. What is the source of that, or where and when do you remember a place or a time when that was specific? I mean,
Mm,
there's a really if you ever want to read body politically incorrect stories from the Middle Ages, then you absolutely have to read Giovanni Boccaccio's Il Decamerone, the Decameron.
oh God.
And not that Netflix bullshit. That thing on Netflix was not the Decameron. It was not the Decameron. It had nothing to do with the actual Decameron or the stories that are contained within it.
That's
But
very valuable.
there's this character that keeps cropping up
Mm,
in these folk tales,
mm,
because there's at least three different stories involving him, and he's a real ass. He is the foil of the jokes, and he doesn't even realize he's the foil of the joke. There's one story in which because he's such a loathsome, horrible individual, his so-called friends, in air quotes again, convince him that he's pregnant. They
lovely.
actually they convince him that he's pregnant, and they convince him. They have they hire again air quotes physician to
Mm,
come and physic him, and they convince him. The physician convinces him to pay a whole lot of money to
mm.
help rid him of the unwanted pregnancy, and it's an absolutely hysterical story. Along the way, he says, when he's diagnosed as being pregnant, he says, basically says, good lord, how is this thing going to exit my body?
It's brilliant.
Right, so there's that same asshole. I mean, maybe I forget what his name is off the hand. I remember that Boccaccio describes him as having teeth like the pegs of a gittern because they're so crooked and so huge and so unappealing. Um, but he, at one point in one of the stories, he's actually beating his wife.
Oh, lovely.
And yeah, lovely, right? And this is the horrible thing. When I say politically incorrect, I meant it.
Mm,
This is supposed to be a funny story, right? And it just presents that as a buy your way. By the way, this is what's happening. And apparently he does so in such an egregious manner that it does leave marks that are visible. And her family, her brothers come for him,
oh,
and they beat him to within an inch of his life in this story.
mm.
And that's also supposed to be funny.
Ah,
It's a different, it's a different, it's a different kind of humor
mm.
than we find acceptable today. But
It's
it's, you
interesting
know,
that it highlights the fact that the brothers are able to go in there and defend the. It's not the fact that she's treated completely like a cow. Oh, we'll
right.
go beat the cow there. No, the brothers treat her as a human being, and when she
Yeah.
gets beaten, they find out and they put their own justice in there. That's interesting.
It was a very, because this is 14th century. This is around the time of the plague, right? So
Yeah.
the framework of the Decameron is that these 10 aristocrats from Florence try to escape the plague the way a lot of aristocrats did, by leaving the city and going to a country estate. One of them has a country estate in Fiesole, which is about
Mm,
5 miles from Florence now. And so they go there, and one of the things they do every day to pass the time while they're hoping to not die
yeah.
is they tell stories. And every
Mm,
day they tell 10 stories. So 10 days plus 10 stories is 100 stories by the end of the day.
ah,
So it's a
mm,
really clever frame for what are, in essence, medieval folk tales.
mm,
And stories like that give us a really keen insight into daily life of common people, not the great people, because the people they're describing in these stories are often not princes
mm.
and princesses. They are the fishmonger, they
Yeah.
are a carpenter, they are a mercer, right?
Mm,
So it's, if you really want to get an idea of into the daily lives, the way people actually interacted in 14th century Italy, check out the Decameron. But I'm
mm.
just going to warn you, it can be a little hard to read sometimes. Also, there are some upsetting stories with regard to the treatment of Jews. It's
Ah,
the 14th century in Italy. Sorry. Um, but there are also some fantastic adventure tales, like swashbuckling, fantasy, sorcerers and sorceresses, uh, adventures of daring do, a magic ship carrying the princess away from the court where she's been banished from. Right, there's some really interesting fantasy tales in there as well. So it's a mixed bag.
Definitely say so. Jim, yeah, 100%. I used to be like that as a child as well. I used to think kissing is how girls got pregnant as well when I was a young fella. So
Oh
I
my
was
god!
just that innocent as well.
So
We'll
so
start
I've
one.
I've I've a friend who's the result of her mother thinking that's how you got pregnant.
Oh God, go on.
Oh yeah. So this is her mother. This I think her mother. This would have been back in the 50s, 60s probably.
Yeah.
And her mother was an innocent, and her mother was told, if you kiss a boy, you'll get pregnant.
Mm.
So she didn't kiss him.
Ah, that's horrible.
She did not kiss him, and thus my friend exists.
Right. It's horrible.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, what was it called? We'll start finishing up there. Guys, thank
Any
you
comments?
so much. I think they no fresh comments in there. We didn't
Okay.
have anyone popping in there with any fresh comments. Not from this side anywhere, unless let me quickly. Yeah, that seems to be pretty much it. Since you guys are slowing down, we'll start to finish up there.
Yep.
Thanks, guys, so much for popping in for this weekend. We're going to just Friday or
Yeah.
Thursday for you guys. We'll make that a regular thing for you guys on Tuesday and Thursday night. That we'll do a nice
Hmm.
little live stream covering the
Yeah.
news and talking about the medieval history at large.
Yep.
This Saturday night, I will be live again with the lads covering clans and dynasties. So definitely head on over to Irish Medieval History and subscribe to my channel if you want to watch us live. Rachel, what's your plans? Because I don't have anything happening on Patreon this week. The following week after that, I start my presentation and classes on the Scottish War of Independence. So
Mm.
if you're into the Scottish War of Independence, please head on over to my Patreon at Irish Medieval History and subscribe or just donate to the channel if you just want to support my content. What was it called? The donation to get onto those presentations is 20 quid a month, which is not bad for a presentation once a week dedicated to a high academic standard. Rachel, what's your plan for this week?
Yeah, tomorrow morning, Asia Seoul Standard Time / Tokyo Standard Time will be medieval story time.
Oh,
So I will
nice.
probably be reading one of those inappropriate stories from the Decameron.
Mm.
So if you'd like to hear a very inappropriate story, but written in an early 17th century Shakespearean style English, because that's the translation from which I'm working, then check that out. And we'll cover a couple of other medieval stories. And of course, as always, when we read the stories together, we then go through, discuss the symbolism, the subtext, the history that underpins the tale. Then on Sunday morning, Asia time, Saturday evening, America's middle of the night, your Africa, I will be doing my medieval cooking party. So we will be
Nice.
working from an original recipe or recipes, and we will be interpreting the recipe because medieval recipes are not clear. They don't have measurements generally, they don't have timings. So we will be recreating, interpreting, and hopefully successfully making actual medieval dishes from the 14th and or 15th century. I'll talk about food history, I'll talk about food science, and of course, answer all your questions about medieval material culture as we cook along. So, yeah, if any of that interests you, then tune in. And I do have a Patreon. If you'd like to support my medieval recreation work, my research into medieval material culture and recreating it, then I have a Patreon account, The Creative Contessa. Comes with a whole host of extra perks, including extra footage, extra materials, extra resources, hours and hours and hours of full tutorials that are not accessible to the general public, dance lessons, sewing lessons, unedited footage where you get to see me and my ladies in waiting goofing around. And also we have channel membership on YouTube if you prefer to stay in this ecosystem. And I do have channel subscription or page subscription on Facebook now. But of all of them, I would say that probably the Patreon comes with the biggest list of perks at this point. Yeah.
Happy
Yeah. So
days.
yeah, welcome to our community. Oh wow. PS3, welcome to our communities. And if you were watching me, the Creative Contessa, then please pop over to Philip's Irish Medieval History channel and subscribe. And everyone, don't forget to hit that notification bell and make certain that all is clicked, because if you don't click all, then you won't get notifications when we do things like go live. YouTube will just notify you randomly or not, depending on the day. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Other than that, guys, thanks very much and slán go bhfuil. See you. Bye, 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 bye.
Stay creative, everyone.